Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very, very accomplished author and someone who's done a lot in life, Dr. Barbara Flugge. Barbara, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Barbara is the author of a book titled The Mobility Moves Minds, and she's also the founding member of Women H2H. So today, Barbara, let's talk about your book. Tell me about the book and what motivated you to write it.
Well, the book, in fact, is I call it a testimonial, right? Mm-hmm. Because I started 2018 to look into resilience. Mm-hmm. So it was when I quit a corporate life to start my own business, right? So being a senior person actually and starting, let's say, more, in a later period of my life, right? I wanted to know and look into mobility from various different angles. Mm-hmm. And this is why I started Mobility Moves Minds, because I was writing and researching and consulting mobility beforehand. Mm-hmm. So, and it's a book, it's a testimonial, it's also a deliverable, mm-hmm. because I work with more than 20 contributors from 4 continents. Mm-hmm. And this is actually, it went to live in 2021, so 2.5 years later.
Oh, wonderful. And when was the book released?
It was released actually in stages in summer, so this summer, because I published it in German, but also in parallel in English.
Wonderful. And is the book available on Amazon and other platforms?
Yes, it is available on Amazon and various other online retailers. Mm-hmm. And the point is to mention here when you get the book, so you get it in print when you order it, but in parallel, so included in the print, there is a digital version as well. Okay. An interactive version with material to download with video and interview testimonials as well. Yeah.
Fascinating. So, coming back to your book, how do you define the word mobility?
Well, mobility, what you see from the cover has these 3 dots, right? It's for me physical, digital, and mental mobility. And what I like to read is the dedication, how I came up with this 3-tier mobility. Sure. And I think that explains very well what mobility is to me. Mm-hmm. So it's dedicated to the ones who ingeniously encounter the beauty of resisting, mm-hmm. to feed an ever-changing world with humanity, with soul, with intellect, with creativity, so that everyone is equally treated physically, digitally, and mentally. Mm. So it's about to be free, and it is a right to everyone. Yeah.
Very interesting. So in your book, you refer to mental mobility, digital mobility, and physical mobility. Help me understand these maybe with an example.
Yes, let me give you an example of a mid-sized company that produces, for example, bicycles, right? So we experienced it a lot here in Europe, that some parts of the bike actually are stuck somewhere in a warehouse on another continent because of Corona, because of ripple effects in the supply chain. Mm. So the company is physically not mobile because it cannot deliver to its customers and clients, right, the product. If it's being digitally mobile, it would enhance for the waiting time, but also in between digital services that accompany the bike, that accompany, let's say, the experience and the excitement. And what is the connector for companies, for managers, leaders, to look into the digital space a bit differently than, let's say, video or online meetings, right, for clients, is the mental mobility. So to be as creative as possible, to look into obstacles, what happened in the past when you purely physically, let's say, delivered your product, and what does it mean to add, let's say, even a profitable element through the digital part. And that's this cognitive flexibility, how psychologists call. So that's an example of like a mid-sized company, right?
Okay. And, again, when I was reading about the book, There is a phrase or a comment there, experience the holistic mastermind resilience toolbox.
Yeah.
What does this mean, and what are the implications of this on leaders?
Well, a toolbox for me is when I look into my past as a consultant, as a manager, as a leader. I always wanted to have like a ready to use daily toolbox consisting of elements and assets that everyone actually can consume, but also use based on what is just needed. It might be advice, it might be a physical, let's say, gamification enhanced tool. So it is a set of various techniques and methods encapsulated, let's say, in ready to use tools, assets, always enhanced with creativity and gamification. That's very important for me.
Give me an example of a tool that you have thought of.
Well, I have been actually already, it's already in the market. It's called persona profiling. What it actually does is the term persona profiling comes from marketing. And it looks into personas like you and me, right? And our listeners like Generation Z or others, other kind of, let's say, customer groups. For me, that was not sufficient. So I looked into persona profiling to address the human and the non-human customers and consumers of services and products. And it's a card game. So it's a physical card game. Actually, you can use instantly in a train. You can work with it for an entire day, or you can do it to introduce and get to know better your business partner for the future. But it's also now digitally available. So because I wanted to have this connect physical digital through this mental, let's say, mental mobility, So persona profiling is one element. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And again, when I was reading the summary of your book, you talk about the 7 pillars of corporate resilience. For our viewers and listeners, tell us about these 7 pillars.
Well, to me, a corporation of any size, right, being a startup or an international company, I look at it like a house, right, like a home, physical and digital. So the 7 elements are, the first thing is the golden circle. Yeah, we know that, of course, to look into the corporate strategy. The second element is the resilience management. So to look into resilience as an asset of any company, it requires, of course, an establishment, right? A little bit of a kind of establishment within the operational model. The operational model is the third one. Then the ecosystems model. So what is your ecosystem you're selling into, you're advising, you're consulting, where actually is your ecosystems in the markets? Yeah. That's the fourth one. The fifth one is the operations model. So where everything comes together, where you look into how to market, how to sell. So the market model is actually comprising that and determines, of course, the economic, the sustainable, but also the ethical values and operations. And the last one, the 7th element, that's really brand new. It's a resilience membrane. I hope I pronounce it right. I call it like you put on your Gore-Tex jacket when you go out and it's raining, and it protects you. Okay. And the resilience membrane actually are everyone who work for the company. So it's the staff. It's the one that have the notion that something is going wrong out there, and they help actually to protect the company and bring back these kind of insights from the markets. Yeah.
Very interesting. So, you must have done a lot of research about your book, and you must have spoken to many, many people. Give me an example of some resilient leaders and corporates and some which are not so resilient. And don't take names, but I'm sure they will, you can give me examples. And how are they different?
Well, when you look into resilient leaders, and I have a couple in mind, they have a social skill. They have a social skill. They listen, they observe, they discuss, and they consider also obstacles in advance.
Right.
They are also decisive.
Right.
And resiliency does not necessarily mean that you do everything collaboratively in a group, but you make up your mind based on the wisdom and on the insights of the others, regardless if you're in a hierarchical role above or under. A hierarchy doesn't actually take any role in that. And then they are decisive, so they are looking into what needs to be done and they run the decision. And they do it even they're physically not connected with the colleagues or with the staff. So they have this, I call it resilience sensing, also what concerns the others and what actually makes them maybe not really being moving right now. Let's say that they might be distracted. So they have the social and the decisive skill. A not so resilient leader actually does not take into account the individual speed of the staff members. I actually encountered that in my business life as well. So when you're too fast, you see the trends already coming, but your manager doesn't want it because it's pushing him or her outside of the comfort zone. Right. Then you are, let's say, you have to decide on your own. So the not so resilient leaders actually leave decisions to the others.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, based on your research, what is the impact of culture on resilience?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because we discussed it in the interviews I did over the 2.5 years. Because I got from not so resilient leaders the feedback that culture differentiates resiliency. It cannot be looked at it as a global asset, right? And honestly, culture flavors it. However, when you look into someone from the Philippines or Australia, or India or Costa Rica, or Germany, Switzerland, the definition and the expectation and resiliency is very common. So culture flavors it based on, let's say, driven by the decisions you take after looking into the resilience mode, but it does not really, let's say, it does not really change what resiliency means. At the end, it's an individual skill, but the expectation is common across the globe. It's a global asset. Yeah. And
have you come across a situation where you've got a very resilient leader joining an organization which is culturally not so resilient?
Yes.
So what happens there? Mayhem.
The point is, I met a person that actually fits quite well into your description. It's a very traditional company. And there's a question about what is my role? So I think that's a key question I found very often when you look into change management projects, but also startups. Because when you are a startup and you might not join a company, but you join an ecosystem. So like a traditional, let's say, predefined network of business partners, clients, and customers. The question is very often, what is my role? And do I fit right here? Yeah.
Fascinating. So moving on, Barbara, what are the most important mobility qualities a CEO should have?
Well, to me, it is about the mental mobility, the cognitive flexibility firsthand, because that comprises openness. It comprises creativity, the social skills, living with obstacles, and even they are there, and there will always be obstacles out there, because we live in a world where incidents happen and from various different directions. So to be decisive and allow your company, as a leader, allow your company to look into this example from physical, adding the digital mobility as well. So to look into products and look into services, and also be open, invite your staff in. That's what the key skill for me and competences of a resilient leader. Invite them in and turn it into what I'm doing now are these resiliency workshops, but not in an emotional sense purely, really in about what is a company strategy when you implement physical and digital mobility through the aid of or the support of mental mobility. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
My next question to you is, again, when I was reading about you, there is a phrase which there is a comment: create like an artist, solve like an engineer, act like an entrepreneur. Help me understand, because entrepreneur, engineer, artist, very, very differing skill sets.
Yes, and that's actually about me, right? I'm an artist in my private life. I'm a painter. So an artist and the one who looks at the painting sees things differently. You encounter many different things, forms, shapes, a color, and you allow yourself to see differently than the one person that stands next to you, for example, in an exhibition. And art opens minds. So I'm running these art to business, art to be as well sessions, where we look into paintings and artworks, and you don't have to be an artist, you don't have to be studied art, for example. It's really about seeing things differently and let your eyes wander. Because this is also how trend scouting actually works when we look into the fashion industry, for example.
Right.
To let your eyes wander. So that's the artist, seeing things differently and being able to paint what you see and describe it in your color, in your forms, in your shapes. Solve it like an engineer. I studied applied sciences, so I'm not per se an engineer. But it's about looking into what are the ingredients you like to bring to the table, because your client is asking this question about what I can do to sustain in the next year. What is if my competitor, let's say, suddenly turns into a client? That might be an awkward thing. Even more challenging might be the solution for a supplier who turns into your competitor. So an engineer looks into what is the preferred state at the end, right? What is the outcome you're striving for? And act like an entrepreneur is about being able to question everything and to take into account technologies as well you have not worked before with, and have this open mind, also to act and not just talking. So really walk the talk. And that's why these three facets are multidimensional. At the end, it gives a good flow, like a life cycle when you look at it. Yeah.
Fascinating. So I've got time for two more questions for you, Barbara. My next question is that as you were researching for your book and as you were writing your book, what were some of your challenges and what were some of your learnings?
Well, the challenge was that actually I started it in 2018. I wanted to release it end of 2019. I was actually, there were two people that wanted to publish about mobility overall. But the other person quit. And we also had discussions about the scope, and I wanted to have mobility move our minds. So the challenge was to continue on my own, and also to allow me and accept that I need more time. So it took me 2.5 years, and also to co-finance it. And it also allow me to look into these different contributions I got from the ones that helped me to co-finance the book. So companies, but also individuals. That was a challenge. What I also learned was my own resiliency level. On the one hand side, it's good to see and hear all these different notions and voices about resiliency. And I dived very much into also the personal stories of the contributors. I mean, it's a business book, right? But it has this personality part as well from the individuals that are there. And I got more and more interest of individuals and leaders and companies that wanted to take part. It would have helped me with the co-financing, honestly, but I said no, because my energy level, I was then exhausted. I was exhausted because I dived so much into this resiliency stories, but also the life cycle of the individuals. And this is why I actually decided to not have more than the ones you find there. So we have 17 life stories, also including myself. And that was another learning from me, that I write about myself, because that's actually what I haven't done before. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. And the other challenge, it was a challenge, but also a learning, and it was a miracle. If we have time, I just like to cover that very briefly. I encountered, as I said, I'm a painter, and I encountered a photographer from the fashion industry, because I just stumbled over an exhibition in a small town nearby here where I live. And I was really fascinated about the motives and about the person. And we met for an interview. And it didn't happen that she got being part of the book. What happened actually, based on the story I was writing for her, right? A story to tell. I suddenly found the entry chapter I wanted to write about. And it's actually about my mother and my family. Sorry. And that was very, that was a lot of learning for me to really go into this private matter, but also looking into the resiliency of people that actually weren't so lucky in the past, right? To move to another city, to make something out of their own living, and deciding to leave their family because there is a dream to move into a city, and not staying, for example, in the village where she was growing up. And my father did the same thing. So he started very early with his studies, right? And having the two small kids. And that was a lot of learning for me to do that, and also to do that in a sophisticated manner, that is not, putting them into the spotlight, because that's not what they want, right? But to really go look beyond and identify what it means to train resiliency for everyone who reads the books and learns about it. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And Barbara, my last question to you, and this is about the millennials and the Gen Zs, people who are now inheriting the earth and hopefully will make the earth a better place than my generation is leaving them. How are millennials and the Gen Zs changing corporate leadership?
I think there are a couple of facets there, right? I believe that they're changing it by acting like an entrepreneur, because they are questioning, and they are also they're questioning the status quo, right? The status quo of corporate leadership, that to a certain extent also has been grown over decades, based on best buddies, based on a very well-deserved comfort zone, where the comfort zone these days actually needs to be looked at it from a sustainable and a diverse perspective. So they change the corporate leadership by looking how they will influence with their own solutions our society and citizenship. because they will introduce and you will introduce new solutions, offerings, regardless that there's a corporation. And corporate leadership will then learn from Generation Z and millennials, because they're suddenly sitting at the same table, physically or digitally or virtually, because it gives a wow effect. And the corporate leader, who's a resilient leader, is open-minded to take that into account, to look to look at a millennial not being a student or a learner or a kid or a scholar, but being a contributor, being an eye opener, right? Being an artist, so to speak. Yeah.
Very well said. Very well said. Barbara, we've now come to the end of our program. Thank you so much for talking to me. Thank you for telling me such amazing things about your book, Mobility Moves Minds. I mean, I've learned so many different things. Thank you for talking to me about the 7 pillars of corporate resilience. I wish the book all success, and I wish you all success. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.